Lee Miller was a surrealist photographer, model. She was a fashion photographer, portrait photographer, World War II correspondent, and just generally a pretty awesome lady, as well as being my gran. She never allowed herself to be told she couldn't do something. She was always driven and determined to do things that she wanted to do. I know all her photographs, I've read her diaries, her letters. I've got a hell of a lot of questions for that lady. Lee was born in Poughkeepsie in New York State in 1907. Her father was an engineer, her mother was a nurse. Her first career was as a model in New York, and she appeared on the front cover of American Vogue as a drawing by Georges Lepape in March 1927, so just a month before her 20th birthday. So this is a portrait of Lee by Arnold Genthe, and it was taken in 1927, which is when her career as a model really set off. She had the top photographers in America, people like Edward Steichen, like Arnold Genthe, wanting to take her picture. So she has this opportunity to ask them what they're doing, about their process, and she became quite interested in it. She models a lot for Edward Steichen. In one particular picture, he then gave to an agency, and it was sold on to advertise a women's sanitary product, which at the time was seriously taboo in America. Overnight, nobody wanted the Kotex girl modelling their posh frocks anymore. She really wanted to get further into photography, so she basically used the Kotex ad as an excuse to ditch her life in America and go to Paris. In Paris, she apprenticed herself to the American surrealist photographer, Man Ray. So this portfolio, called Electricity, is a brilliant example of Lee Miller working with Man Ray. The Electrics company commissioned him to create this kind of artistic, photographic portfolio of images to promote electricity. The images are really quite beautiful and surreal. So he uses lots of different techniques in it. This one was he's used his rayograph technique, where he's actually placed the object on the paper and then exposed it to light, so you get this impression on it. And she was really a key part in the ideas behind this portfolio and the final result. She also appears in the images too. So this is her torso, and then he's kind of drawn with light on the image as well. He very much likes cutting her head off. There's very few pictures where she does have a head. She's constantly got these people like Man Ray. Picasso painted her portrait as well, wanting to objectify her. Being trapped inside this really beautiful body, particularly in the early part of her career when she's trying to make a name for herself, made it harder because she was incredibly intelligent and really creative. And in fact, in her copy, which is an artist proof, he's written to Lee Miller, which is quite official, rather than just Lee. I mean, they were lovers. He could have just wrote, darling, but it's like he wants to recognise her properly for her contribution. So he's formally written on the outside, to Lee Miller, without your enthusiasm and without your aid, this album would have not been possible. Gratefully, Man Ray. She was his apprentice for 9 months before she then set up her own studio and started working as a photographer in her own right. In order to subsidise her work as an artist and keep her studio going and pay her bills, she modelled still. She modelled for Man Ray, and she modelled for Hoyningen Huene, who took this picture. This is my all-time favourite Huene picture of her. It's just so timeless. If it wasn't black and white and slightly, discoloured because it's so old, it could be someone yesterday. The pose is also quite, I think, energetic and strong as well. Hoyningen Huene was actually the boss of French Vogue at the time, and he was really helpful to Lee in showing her what Vogue as a magazine in general expected of a photographer. When she's in Paris, she's also part of the Surrealist section. And in 1931, Lee went to work with Cocteau on this film called The Blood of a Poet. In it, she is this statue. And to make her look like the statue, they kind of put butter on her and flour, but the lights would get really, really hot and the butter would start to melt, and she got really stinky and quite uncomfortable and felt like some pastry. It's very dark and surreal and very well done. There's an image of hers which is quite disturbing. On one particular occasion when she was photographing a radical mastectomy for this doctor, and she asked if she could keep the breast. She took the breast, she travelled across Paris to French Vogue studio, and she set it up on a table in the studio on a plate, like a plate setting. So the plate, a knife and fork on either side, and the breast was in the middle of the plate. And she took 2 photographs before Hoyningen Hine, who ran the studio, worked out what she was doing and threw her and the breast out of the studio. But the messaging behind it is quite an angry Lee Miller, going, you know, you want to take pictures of my breasts, you want to objectify my body. If you're so into them, have it. It's one of her really iconic surrealist images, and it was taken in Paris in 1930. She was in Champs-Élysées outside a really posh perfume shop called the Guerlain Perfumerie, and she was kind of looking at the shadows of the trees in the windows. We know that because we've got her contact sheet that relates to this, and then spots this happening. A very rich lady with a diamond ring is opening the door of the Guerlain Perfumerie, and it makes it look like her hand is exploding. Because what's actually happened is so many diamond rings had been used to open the door, and they'd been so big that they've actually scratched the glass and made this kind of puff picture. And it's become one of her iconic surrealist images. Well, Lee arrived in London to settle and live here on the 3rd of September 1939, which is the day that Britain declared war on Hitler and the Nazis. She was American though. She didn't have a working visa, so she kind of rocked up at British Vogue studio and offered to volunteer as their photographer. She very quickly became their main photographer and their main contributor to their magazines. And it wasn't just Vogue magazine, it was the pattern book, the knitting pattern book, the dress pattern book. Her work was prolific during this period. The men are all sent off, so the women are kind of called up. They're working in textile factories, munitions factories, the Navy, the Air Force, and all these kind of places. British government realised that women at that time didn't read newspapers. So if they wanted to get messaging out to the female population, magazines were the way to reach their audience. They were asked to do this kind of messaging around safety products. So suddenly, every month, Lee had to do photographs that would fit with an article about having your hair out, so wearing turbans or short hair. Then they asked her to try and make factory wear look fashionable. So it's all of this kind of soft propaganda and encouraging women to get behind the war effort. This particular image is kind of encouraging them to use some safety wear that's been developed. The mask that this model is wearing has got crosses on it. It's supposed to kind of reduce the glare that you get when you're fire watching. They're sitting in the mouth of a bomb shelter, which is actually Lee's bomb shelter in the back of her garden in Downshire Hill in Hampstead, which apparently is painted light pink on the inside. They are trying to appeal to the more everyday women, but they are using models. So you've got this mix of fashion and kind of this practical messaging that the government and the war effort is trying to get across. Up until this point, the articles about women and the war effort had been more about what the women's doing at home. But finally, Vogue is starting to present these articles that are really a lot more gritty and a lot more powerful. Lee forces her editor at British Vogue, Audrey Withers, to sign her up as a woman war correspondent. She tried to sign up to be a correspondent with the British Army, and they were like, we do not allow women to go anywhere near combat. And the American Army were taking women war correspondents. That gave her a pass to go over to Europe and follow the Allies as they advanced. What I noticed first is the button here on the sofa. It's popped out and it looks like it's falling down. It makes you think something's wrong here. This particular shoot is in the mayor of Leipzig's office. Another journalist called Margaret Bourke-White covered the same shoot in Life magazine. And in Margaret's pictures, she very much focuses on the wider shot. And in there, you can see the deputy mayor. He's kind of slunched forward on his desk, and to his left is his wife, who's kind of laid back on a chair. And then in front of him on the sofa is Renato Lisa, his daughter. The three of them had heard that the Allies were coming, so they all committed suicide together in this room. So Lee's image is particularly poignant because she gives her some dignity. The way that she's shown her serene in this awful moment. This article is actually in American Vogue, and it's one of her most iconic articles. It's their kind of victory edition. By now, she's been to the horrific concentration camps. She went to Ohrdruf, Penning, Buchenwald, and then she was at the liberation of Dachau prison camp. What she saw was horrendous and would stay with her for the rest of her life. When she's with the Allied forces and they're pushing through Germany, they're hearing these rumours about the conditions in these concentration camps, but nobody quite wants to believe it's true. And when they get there and they find these crematorium ovens and these piles of bones, which are actually human remains, they realise that it's worse than true. It's horrendous. She writes in a cable to Audrey, begging her to publish these images and to make sure that people know what's happened. And she's saying, I don't usually take pictures of horrors, but don't think that every town and every area isn't rich with them. I hope Vogue feels that it can publish these pictures. She was just determined to make sure that everybody knew what was really going on. That was the 30th of April, 1945. That evening, she had a very different billet. Lee had found out there was this place in Munich that had running water, electricity, and coal. That combination by this time was unheard of. She turned up the door. An American corps had already taken it over, and it was Hitler's apartment in Munich. And it was there that evening where she has her legendary bath. It was published in Lee's last photojournalistic article, which is in July 1953. It's kind of sad because by this point, the war's caught up with her. She writes to Audrey about how everyone's going home with broken bodies and broken minds. She just found it really hard to get excited about shooting fashion after seeing these life-changing moments. And so it's quite apposite that this last article that's published is a fun piece. It's called Working Guests. By now, she's moved to Farleys, which is a farm in Sussex. And so this whole article is about how you have all these friends come to visit you and you get them to do the work. So you've got this realist artist, Dorothea Tanning. She's doing some electric wiring. She's got the British pop artist, Richard Hamilton, sitting there sewing her curtains. She has the director of MoMA, Alfred Barr, feeding the pigs. Max Ernst digging the borders in her garden. She's got all these famous artists doing different things around her house. This shot, the guy in it is Saul Steinberg, and he's an American illustrator. She's got him watering the garden, and at this point he's wrestling with the garden hose, but he's known for his black line drawings, so she's also kind of playing on his career here and showing him do a line drawing with the hose. And the last shot in the article is her pretending to be asleep on the sofa, and it's titled, "And the Hostess Takes It Easy." I love her sense of humour. I love that she can be really quite caustic as well, and that she says how she sees it. And there's this kind of just rawness and honesty in the way she writes, and also in her photography, which can be raw and very honest, but it also can be incredibly inspiring and imaginative. A lot of her photographs you can look at and find new things each time you look at the same picture.